One candidate for governor said he will sign an executive order suspending same-sex marriage as soon as he assumes office. In June, Bob Vander Plaat said, quote, "I can't give the people the right to vote on this, but I think I can mobilize people like Senate Majority Leader Mike Ronstall and House Speaker Pat Murphy by saying no more same-sex marriages until you step up and vote to make this law." He went on to say he fully expects Democrats to try to remove him from office for promoting lawlessness, unquote, when he does so. Well, the legality is and not something that we're going to get into, of the executive order. What does somebody's outspokenness like Bob Vander Plaat say about the campaign for governor and the attitude in Iowa? I mean, here's a guy obviously that thinks this is a good issue for him. What does that say?
Well, it is a good issue for him because he's trying to position himself as being, the truest blue conservative in the race. And in a crowded Republican primary, that's a coveted position to stake out. So, really the legality of an executive order is less important than the message he's sending that this issue is more important to him than the technicality of whether what he proposes to do might actually be legal or effective. And to the extent that he is probably the strongest challenger to Terry Branstad right now in polls, that's an effective position for him to have taken.
I find that interesting. I mean, if you listen to what you just said, younger voters seem to think this is a done deal. This is something that's been decided. At some point, isn't there going to have to be somebody in a party or in a campaign that says, if we're going to win in the long term, we need to change our viewpoint and cavitate? But they're just waiting for the next signal?
Well, yeah, I mean, these things are very slow processes, right? I mean, when we're talking about long-term, politicians don't really think long-term. Right? They've got another election coming up, and that's what they're thinking about. So it really matters to them, what does the electorate look like right now, regardless of what it might look like down the road. But, when you're talking about Vander Plaat, you're talking about a Republican primary, and you're talking about, in all primaries, the hardest of the hardcore are the ones who come out and vote and pay attention, and they are typically, the evidence is really clear, the research are very much more conservative on the Republican side, more liberal on the Democrat side when you're talking about primary electorates. So candidates, polarize in the primaries, and then they've got to do something to come back towards the middle. Iowa is not, even with this issue, and even with, I think, the conflicted nature of support, Iowa's not it's not a polarized state in a sense. It's much more centrist than that. And so, let's say Vander Plaat was able to win on this kind of message because he got the hardcore conservatives out. He's got to do something back towards the middle. And what I think he does in that case isn't necessarily anything about same-sex marriage. It's de-emphasizing the issue after the primary and coming back to the economy, because I still think it's the economy.
Young voters do change their opinions on a lot of issues as they get older.
Yeah,
so to make the assumption that this is the future of the issue because of young voters' opinions now, I think is possibly...
But the difference is absolutely dramatic between, and it's at 30. I mean, between the age groups, it's 30 to 35, but between those age groups, we're talking twice the support under 30s to 35 than over that age.
So that's a large number to move, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree, right? People obviously change their opinions over time, but I still think that you're talking about, this isn't an issue that's a matter of kind of being readily swayed one way or the other. What we typically find in the polling is, supporters, opponents, and pretty large don't knows. Those are the folks who aren't sure what they think about it. But I'm less certain that young people are going to change that much as they get older.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I'm certain they're going to change. I'm just saying that's...
It's not the only thing that hangs your hat on.
You can't assume that this is the future of the issue by how people who barely vote now are...
Well, and actually that's a really important point, right? This is, in the end, the elections are about who actually votes, right? They're not about what people think. They're about that subset who actually show up to vote. You know, the Des Moines Register just did some, well, in September, did some polling on this, and I love the one question was, you know, has this affected you? In effect was the question, and 92% of Iowans said no. But not surprisingly, because of course for most people the issue doesn't affect them personally. It obviously affects some people, and it affects them very significantly, but for most people this is just not, you know, something that affects their daily lives. And you see that in other ways in the public opinion data. For example, how important is the issue? We polled back in, we were polling actually just before the decision, back in at the end of March, beginning of April. We released some results right before the decision came down, and then we went back and talked to a number of the people after the decision came down. And, you know, it just was not a terribly important issue then, and it remains not a terribly important issue according to the Register's more recent polling. I think it was like 63% said other issues are more important. So at one level you look at it and say, for most people, most of their lives, most of the time, this isn't that big of an issue, and particularly in the current economic environment. Now, that's the big picture, but there's no campaign going on yet either.
Well, that's
no
right.
intense campaign.
That's right.
And I think
it's a public campaign.
people make the mistake of thinking that you know, the vast majority of Iowa voters don't care that much, that must be good for the status quo, right? But it's not.
Right.
Because the vast majority of people will not be necessarily motivated to go to the polls and
Right.
defend the status quo.
That's exactly it.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so I do think that people get a little bit complacent, or they make a mistake of reading, you know, don't care, not important, as a, it's okay with me. And
Yeah,
didn't we see
don't
that?
get complacent, because the people who care most in Iowa are in opposition to
Right, and I want to
same-sex
talk about that,
marriage.
because that's interesting. and that's
They
different
want
from
to
some other states.
overrule the court.
Right, it's one thing to say I support something. There's another thing to
Absolutely, yeah.
put a sign in your yard and go vote for it.
Absolutely, no question
And
about
so,
it.
but talk to me a little bit, because I found it fascinating that one of the things you told me, in that in a lot of states, those who are most passionate about this issue are those who want to limit marriage. And in some other states, it's those who want to expand marriage. Where do we stand in Iowa?
Here it's the people who want the limits, that want to overturn the court.
Those are the most zealous.
Are the ones who are the most zealous. They are the more likely to say it's an important issue. They're more likely, much more likely, about twice as likely to say they feel strongly about the issue. So, and that's been true in most of the states that have had the issue come up and come to the ballot. What's been interesting for me, because we've just been polling in New Jersey on this, given that the issue's there, and New York is similar, some of these other East Coast states, there the supporters of marriage equality are more passionate about it, they care more about it, they're more likely to say it's an important issue, and the opponents are less likely.